I never thought I'd be the kind of person who could fall for someone over something as simple as a dance. But here I am, 6 months later, still thinking about the moment Felix put his hand on my waist and everything in my world shifted sideways. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me back up and tell you how this whole thing started, because it wasn't some grand romantic gesture or love at first sight. It was messy and confusing and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. My name is Adrian, and I've always been the guy who has his shit together. 24 years old, decent job at a marketing firm, nice apartment in the city, good group of friends. I had my life mapped out in neat little boxes, everything organized and predictable. I'd dated women casually throughout college, nothing serious, and I told myself I was just focused on my career. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I was ignoring, all the little moments where I'd catch myself staring a bit too long at a guy at the gym, or feeling something flutter in my chest when my male co-workers would touch my shoulder. But I was really good at pushing those feelings down, at telling myself it didn't mean anything. Felix moved into the apartment next door in late September. I remember the day perfectly because I was coming home from a brutal 10-hour workday, exhausted and just wanting to collapse on my couch, when I nearly crashed into him in the hallway. He was carrying this enormous box labeled kitchen stuff, and he'd clearly been struggling with it because his face was flushed, and there was this little crease between his eyebrows from concentration. When he looked up at me, he broke into this absolutely devastating smile, and I felt something in my chest do this weird flip that I immediately tried to ignore. "Hey, sorry, I'm kind of blocking the entire hallway," he said, laughing a little breathlessly. "I'm Felix, just moving in next door." I introduced myself and offered to help with the rest of his boxes, telling myself I was just being a good neighbor. We spent the next 2 hours hauling his stuff up the stairs, and I learned he was a grad student studying architecture, that he was originally from Portland, that he had a younger sister he was really close with, and that he made these little gestures with his hands when he got excited about something. I noticed everything about him, catalogued every detail, like my brain was suddenly a camera taking constant snapshots. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the small scar on his left hand, how his voice got softer when he talked about his family. After we finished, he insisted on ordering pizza as a thank you, and we ended up sitting on his bare living room floor, eating straight from the box because he hadn't unpacked his plates yet. It felt easy and comfortable in a way that made me nervous. I kept thinking I should go home, but I didn't want to. When I finally left around midnight, I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, trying to figure out why my heart was racing and why I couldn't stop replaying every moment of the evening in my head. Over the next few weeks, Felix and I fell into this natural friendship. We'd run into each other in the hallway and end up talking for 20 minutes. He'd knock on my door late at night when he was stressed about a project, and I'd make us coffee while he ranted about his professor. I'd text him stupid memes during work, and he'd send back these elaborate responses that would make me laugh out loud at my desk. My co-workers started commenting on how much I was smiling at my phone. I still wasn't ready to examine what I was feeling. Every time I'd catch myself thinking about him a little too much, or feeling disappointed when a day went by without seeing him, I'd push it away. I told myself we were just becoming good friends. That's what this was. Just friendship. Then came the wedding invitation. My cousin Sarah was getting married in November, and the invitation specified it was a formal event with dancing. I mentioned it to Felix one evening when we were hanging out in my apartment, both of us sprawled on opposite ends of my couch, while some movie neither of us was really watching played in the background. "Sounds fancy," Felix said, and there was something in his voice that made me look over at him. He was picking at a loose thread on his jeans, not meeting my eyes. "Do you like dancing?" "I'm decent at it, I guess. My mom made me take lessons when I was younger." I laughed a little. She was convinced every gentleman should know how to waltz. "What about you?" "I've never actually learned. he admitted, and now he was looking at me, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. I always felt too self-conscious to try. But I have this thing coming up too. This gala my program is hosting, and I know there's going to be dancing, and I don't want to look like an idiot, you know? My heart was suddenly beating faster. I could teach you if you want. I mean, the basics, at least. The smile that spread across his face made my chest feel tight. Really? You'd do that? Yeah, of course. What are neighbours for? We set it up for that Saturday night. Felix would come over to my apartment since I had more open space in my living room. I spent the entire week trying not to think too hard about it, but by Saturday afternoon I was nervous in a way I couldn't explain. I cleaned my apartment twice, changed my shirt 3 times, and told myself I was being absolutely ridiculous. Felix showed up right at 7, and he looked nervous too, which somehow made me feel a little better. He was wearing jeans and this soft grey sweater that made his eyes look even more green than usual, and I had to actively stop myself from staring. So, how does this work? He asked, laughing a little awkwardly as he stood in the middle of my living room. I'd already moved my coffee table to the side and queued up a playlist of slow songs on my phone. We'll start with something simple. Just a basic, slow dance. It's really not complicated once you get the feel for it. I walked over to him, and suddenly we were standing maybe 2 feet apart, and I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and warm, and my mouth had gone completely dry. Okay, so one hand goes on my shoulder, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I took his right hand and placed it on my left shoulder, and the simple touch sent electricity racing up my arm. And I'll put my hand on your waist. This was the moment. This was when everything changed. I reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to, and rested my hand on his waist. The fabric of his sweater was soft under my palm, and I could feel the warmth of his body through it, and suddenly I was hyper-aware of every single point of contact between us. His hand on my shoulder felt like it was burning through my shirt. I looked up, and our eyes met, and the expression on his face was something I couldn't quite read. Something intense and vulnerable and maybe a little scared. And then our other hands clasp. Like this, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. I took his left hand in my right, our fingers intertwining, and I had to fight the urge to just hold on and never let go. Okay, he said softly. Now what? Now we just move. It's basically just a box step. I'll lead. Just follow my movements and try to relax. I started the music, some old jazz standard with a slow, steady rhythm, and began to move. Felix was stiff at first, clearly overthinking every step, and he kept looking down at our feet. Hey, I said gently, look at me. Not at the floor. Trust yourself. Trust me. He lifted his eyes to mine, and we were so close now, closer than we'd ever been before, and I could see the little flecks of gold in his green eyes, could count his eyelashes if I wanted to. We moved together slowly, finding a rhythm, and gradually I felt him relax into it. His hand on my shoulder shifted slightly, his fingers pressing a little more firmly against me, and my hand on his waist seemed to develop a mind of its own, my thumb moving in the small circles against his side. You're a natural, I said, and I meant it. He'd found the rhythm now, moving with me like we'd done this 100 times before. I have a good teacher, he replied, and his voice was quiet, almost intimate, and something in the air between us had shifted. The room felt smaller suddenly, warmer, like the space between us was charged with something electric. We danced through the entire song, and then another started, and neither of us moved to pull away. If anything, We were closer now, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, until our clasped hands had drifted closer to our chests, until his face was maybe 6 inches from mine. "Adrian," he said, and my name in his voice sounded different, weighted with meaning. "Can I tell you something?" My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could feel it. "Yeah, anything." I didn't actually need dancing lessons. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them in and they'd finally broken free. "I mean, I do have that gala, but that's not why I asked. I wanted an excuse to be close to you like this. I've wanted that for weeks now, and I didn't know how else to make it happen." I stopped moving, and we stood there in the middle of my living room, still holding each other, the music playing around us. My mind was racing, my heart was racing, everything was racing. But underneath all the panic and confusion was this bright, clear feeling of rightness. "I need to tell you something too," I heard myself say. "I've been lying to myself for weeks, maybe longer, maybe my whole life, I don't know. But I can't keep pretending that the way I feel about you is just friendship. It's not. It's never been just that." Felix's eyes widened slightly, and his hand on my shoulder tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think about you constantly. I'm saying that the best part of my day is when I hear you in the hallway, and I know I'll get to see you. I'm saying that right now, standing here with you, is the most terrified I've ever been, and also the most sure of anything I've ever felt." I took a shaky breath. "I'm saying that I'm pretty sure I'm falling for you. And that scares the hell out of me, because I've never felt this way about anyone, let alone another guy, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." For a long moment, Felix just stared at me, and I watched about a dozen different emotions flicker across his face. Then slowly, carefully, he lifted his hand from my shoulder and brought it to my face, his palm cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing along my cheekbone. "I'm falling for you too," he whispered. "I have been since the day we met. Since you helped me carry those stupid boxes and then ate pizza on my floor and made me laugh even though I was exhausted and stressed. I've been hoping you might feel the same way. But I was too scared to say anything. Too scared I was reading everything wrong." "You weren't reading it wrong," I said, and I was leaning into his touch without even meaning to, my eyes closing for just a second as I let myself feel this. Really feel it without pushing it away. "God, you weren't reading it wrong at all." "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and his voice was trembling slightly, vulnerable and hopeful and scared all at once. I opened my eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. At this beautiful man who'd somehow crashed into my life and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. "Please," I said. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to change my mind, but I didn't want to. I'd never wanted anything more than I wanted this. When his lips finally touched mine, soft and tentative and perfect, something inside me that I hadn't even known was locked away suddenly opened up. The kiss was gentle at first, both of us learning this new language. But then his hand slid into my hair, and my hand on his waist pulled him closer, and it deepened into something that made my knees weak. We broke apart eventually, both breathing hard, and Felix rested his forehead against mine. He started, then laughed softly. I don't even have words for what that was. "Yeah," I agreed, because I didn't have words either. My entire world had just shifted, and I was still trying to catch up with it. We stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, And then Felix pulled back enough to look at me properly. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Where do we go from here?" It was a good question. I'd spent 24 years thinking I knew who I was, thinking I had my life figured out. And now everything was different. I was standing in my living room with a man in my arms, and I'd just kissed him, and I wanted to keep kissing him. And that meant I had to rethink everything I thought I knew about myself. "I don't know," I admitted. "This is all new for me. I've had these feelings before, I think, but I always pushed them down. Never let myself really explore what they meant. And now here you are, and I can't push it down anymore, and honestly, I don't want to. But I'm also kind of terrified because I have no idea what I'm doing." Felix smiled, soft and understanding. "I'm terrified too. I've known I was into guys since high school, but I've never felt this strongly about anyone before. This is new territory for me too, just in a different way. So we're both fumbling around in the dark," I said, and somehow that made me feel better. "Maybe that's okay," Felix said. "Maybe we can fumble around together. Figure it out as we go." I pulled him close again, tucking his head under my chin, and we swayed slightly, even though the music had long since stopped playing. "I'd like that," I said into his hair. "I'd really like that." We spent the rest of that night talking. We moved to the couch eventually, sitting close together, my arm around his shoulders and his hand resting on my knee. And we talked about everything. I told him about the feelings I'd been having for years, the moments of attraction to men that I'd always explained away. He told me about coming out to his family in college, about the relationships he'd had that never quite worked out. We talked about what we wanted, what scared us, what this might mean for both of us. "I need to take this slow," I told him at one point. "Not because I'm not sure about you. I am sure about you. But I need time to process what this means for me, for my identity. I need to figure out how to integrate this part of myself that I've been ignoring." "I get that," Felix said, "and I'm not going anywhere. We'll go as slow as you need." When he finally left around 3 in the morning, he kissed me again at my door, soft and sweet, and I stood there for a solid 5 minutes after he'd gone, just touching my lips and trying to believe this was actually happening. The next few weeks were a strange, beautiful blur of figuring things out. Felix and I started dating, though we kept it quiet at first. I wasn't ready to tell everyone yet. Wasn't ready to answer the questions I knew would come. We'd spend our evenings together, cooking dinner in one of our apartments, watching movies, talking for hours, and we'd kiss a lot. These long, slow kisses that made me feel like I was discovering a whole new part of myself. I started seeing a therapist to help me work through everything I was feeling. It helped to talk to someone objective, someone who could help me untangle all the complicated emotions around sexuality and identity and fear and desire. I learned that coming to terms with your sexuality later in life is more common than I thought, that there's no timeline for self-discovery, that it's okay to be scared and confused and sure all at the same time. Felix was patient with me through all of it. When I had moments of panic, when the reality of what this meant would hit me and I'd start spiraling, he'd hold my hand and remind me that we were in this together. He never pushed me to move faster than I was ready for, never made me feel bad about needing time. About a month after that first kiss, I told my best friend from college, Marcus. We were getting drinks after work, and I just blurted it out, terrified of how he'd react. "I'm seeing someone," I said. "His name is Felix, and he's my neighbor, and I think I'm in love with him." Marcus blinked at me, processed for a second, then broke into a huge grin. "Dude, Finally. I've been wondering when you'd figure that out about yourself. Wait, what? Adrian, come on. I've known you since freshman year. I've seen you with girlfriends and you always seemed kind of checked out. But I've also seen the way you look at certain guys when you think no one's watching. I figured you'd get there eventually. It was shocking and relieving all at once to know that people who loved me had seen things I hadn't been ready to see in myself. Marcus was completely supportive, wanted to meet Felix, and treated the whole thing like it was the most natural thing in the world. Which, I was learning, it was. I told my parents next, over video call because they lived across the country. That was harder. They were surprised, asked a lot of questions, needed time to process. But they also told me they loved me, that they wanted me to be happy, and that they'd like to meet Felix when they visited for Christmas. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Sarah's wedding came in mid-November, and I brought Felix as my date. I was nervous about it, about what my extended family would think, but Felix looked incredible in his suit, and he held my hand as we walked in, and I realized I didn't care what anyone thought. I was happy, happier than I'd ever been. We danced together at the reception, and this time it was different from that first night in my apartment. This time, there was no pretense, no excuse. We danced because we wanted to, because we were together, because I got to hold him and move with him, and not hide how I felt. When a slow song came on, Felix pulled me close and rested his head on my shoulder, and I held him tight and thought about how much had changed in just 2 months. "Remember when you taught me to dance?" Felix murmured against my neck. "I remember you admitting you didn't actually need lessons," I said, smiling. "Best lie I ever told," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Though, for the record, I really did learn a lot that night. Just not about dancing." "Yeah? What did you learn?" He pulled back enough to look at me, and his eyes were soft and full of affection. "I learned that sometimes the scariest thing is also the rightest thing. I learned that you're brave even when you're terrified. I learned that taking a chance on someone is always worth it." I kissed him right there in the middle of the dance floor, in front of my entire family, and I didn't care who was watching. When we broke apart, I saw my cousin Sarah watching us with tears in her eyes and a huge smile on her face. She gave me a thumbs up, and I laughed. That was 6 months ago now. Felix and I are still together, still figuring things out, still learning about each other and ourselves. I've come out to everyone who matters in my life, and while it hasn't all been easy, it's been worth it. I'm learning to be comfortable with this part of myself, to not see it as something scary or wrong, but just as another facet of who I am. We still dance together sometimes, late at night in one of our apartments, just the two of us swaying to soft music. Felix's hand always goes to my shoulder first, and I always put my hand on his waist, and we hold each other close and move together like we've been doing this forever. I think about that first night a lot, about how nervous we both were, about the moment when everything shifted. Felix putting his hand on my shoulder, me putting my hand on his waist, the way the air between us changed. The courage it took for both of us to be honest about what we were feeling. Sometimes the biggest moments in your life come disguised as small ones. A hand on a waist, a slow dance in a living room, a quiet admission of feelings. And sometimes you spend your whole life thinking you know who you are, only to discover there are entire parts of yourself you haven't met yet, waiting for the right person to help you find them. Felix helped me find myself. He helped me be brave enough to look at the feelings I'd been pushing down and to accept them instead of fighting them. He showed me that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to, that it can surprise you and terrify you and save you all at once. I'm not going to lie and say everything has been perfect. There have been hard moments, times when I've struggled with internalized homophobia or worried about how the world sees us. Times when Felix has been patient with me while I work through my stuff, and times when I've had to be patient with him through his. But we're learning together, growing together, and that's what matters. Last week, Felix got accepted into a competitive internship program for next summer. When he told me, he was so excited he could barely get the words out, and watching his face light up made my chest feel full. Later that night, after we'd celebrated with takeout and champagne, we were lying in his bed, my head on his chest and his fingers running through my hair, and he said something that made me freeze. "I love you," he said, quiet and certain. I know we haven't said it yet, but I do. I love you, Adrian. I lifted my head to look at him, and he looked nervous but sure, and I realized I'd been waiting to hear those words without even knowing it. "I love you too," I said, and saying it out loud felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I think I have, for a while now." He kissed me then, slow and deep, and I thought about how far I'd come from that guy who was so scared of his own feelings that he couldn't even acknowledge them. I thought about the version of me who existed before Felix moved in next door, who had his life all mapped out in neat little boxes, who thought he knew exactly who he was. That version of me feels like a stranger now. I'm still Adrian, still the same person in all the ways that matter, but I'm also different. I'm braver now, more honest, more willing to sit with uncertainty and discomfort because I know that's where growth happens. I'm learning that identity isn't fixed, that you can discover new things about yourself at any age, that it's never too late to become more fully who you're meant to be. And I have Felix, this incredible man who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, who was brave enough to ask me for dancing lessons even though he didn't need them, who put his hand on my shoulder and let me put my hand on his waist, and trusted that I'd figure out what it meant eventually. Sometimes I think about that moment, about his hand on my shoulder and mine on his waist, about how such a simple touch could change everything. But that's what love does, I guess. It finds you in the small moments, in the quiet gestures, in the spaces between words. It asks you to be brave enough to feel it, to acknowledge it, to let it transform you. We're still dancing, Felix and I, still learning the steps, still finding our rhythm, and I wouldn't have it any other way.